Disease. First is what I call social democratic distribution of services. The basic norm that everybody, every human being, receives educational services, social services,
All right, so
child
let's
care.
get into it. This guy is Jeffrey Sachs. This is an economist. I was just sort of interested in this video. I've never seen it before. I'm just picking up now. He's very liberal. He believes that what he's talking about right now is like global future and stuff. It's pretty interesting. I don't agree with it, but we're going to touch on interesting stuff. I'm sure he's a good economist, even though I don't agree with him.
Healthcare and so forth as a matter of social organization. As I think everyone here knows, we are the last high-income democracy to accomplish that. It's still viewed in a horrible way in the United States by the Wall Street Journal editorial page, let's say. But it is the norm in every other high-income democracy. And that's because it functions, it works, it creates social cohesion, it's efficient, it's lower cost in terms of resources. And so I think that this is a basic feature. Second, I think we will move to a regime of global fiscal sharing and financial sharing in a way that we never have before. This is very hard. This will no doubt take decades because even the European Union has an extraordinarily difficult time of redistributing even modest amounts across borders of a tight union. Doing this globally has never been accomplished, but I think that it is a part of the logic of the international strong interdependence that we will move in that direction. And one could even see the recent G20 agreement on tax and the 136 countries that have signed on to it as the opening of a new regime of tax cooperation. Because unlike trade, tax never had this kind of cooperation. It had treaties against double taxation, but basically not an international regime. But this is no longer tenable in such a tightly interconnected world. Third, for addressing the environmental and Anthropocene challenges, we must be in a period of substantial planning. Again, I apologize, this runs completely against the grain in the United States, but I was born in 1954, and in 1955 the Federal Highway Act was voted, and much of my childhood I recall the debates about whether the highway should run at 11-mile road or 12-mile road or 10-mile road in my neighborhood in Detroit. It was a planning issue. It was a land use issue. It was a political issue. It took 35 years. The United States built the highway system. It didn't just say, there's money, go build highways. This is a market activity. There was actually a map and a plan and a 35-year effort to do that. I would argue, and I would argue at great length, that we need the same for the energy system. There's no way that you build an energy system by saying, pay a carbon price and do what you want. No utility works that way. No power grid works that way. No energy system.
So he's absolutely right about this. Market solutions don't work. It's like, no, we're not going to waste any time even discussing that. Market solutions don't work. And our political system, there's 2, 4, 8-year turnovers at like a regular interval. That actually keeps us depoliticized, honestly. It makes us think we're like doing stuff and we're not. We have to have long-term good planning for good projects. It's not hard. You can still have like some political transition, but you can't have two sides that are diametrically opposed to each other and come in and undo what the last one did. We need to so yeah, we need a good plan. I dropped my thought because I was looking at the drop frames. Hopefully this is coming through clearly. Yesterday I noticed I was dropping frames like crazy, but the back to the point though, the we need long-term planning. It's true, you can't plan economies. You also can't model economies. That doesn't mean you can't make political plans and manage things as things are changing and happening. That's what we want.
System works that way. Since we are in a period unprecedentedly of forced, top-down, directed transformation, and we need to be for our physical safety, this requires a different kind of politics. And of course, we're almost incapable of it in this country right now. We have been 29 years without one vote in the U.S. Senate for significant action on climate. And last week, Joe Manchin threw out the latest attempt as if nothing had happened in the past 29 years. But the rest of the world is behaving extraordinarily differently. I believe on the fourth point that we are moving to a very different kind of time use. Most of our discussion in the economics profession is about what kind of jobs will come next after the machines can do the current jobs. And I'm hoping that no new jobs will come next, but plenty of time at the coffee shop. That's my own hope. In other words, that we see these advances as an opportunity for leisure, for culture, for education.
This is actually a good point. So since the 70s, we've gotten extremely more productive without pay going up. And things have actually become very precarious for the labor force. It's like women enter the labor force, and now it's like it takes two people to have what used to, one person used to be able to have a family easier, and two people can have a family now. But so if we fix things and we have pay equal productivity much more, and we take advantage of these advancements we've made that make us more productive. The goal isn't to like be more productive. It's not like unlimited growth. We are more productive, but we balance that with maybe having like 4-day work weeks, 32-hour work weeks, an extra day off to pursue leisure, like he's talking about, or things like education. He was saying here too. Also, to be politically active, to be politically what's the word? Be politically engaged. It's having like a third day off. It doesn't, the Monday through Friday, different people can take different days off, but it's good to have an off day to be politically active in your small community. What a republic is you have town halls, city assembly, Toastmasters type meetings where everyone's able to get up and speak and stuff. And you have your votes there, you make decisions there, and then there is a higher level where there's representatives that represent a constituency, and then they're going to Congress, or they're electors who elect the people who go to Congress, and that person represents their constituency at the back. It's a pyramidal hierarchy, and but it starts at the bottom. It's a grassroots thing, and it takes people being educated and aware. And an easy way to do that, or a good step in the direction of doing that, is since we're more productive, if we actually distribute the wealth better. It's not that people start making more money. They do make more money, but it's not just that they like all of a sudden get like 5 times the pay while they're working their same 5-week job. It's that they get like 3 times the pay, 4 times the pay, and they're only working 4 days a week. But then you're not just like being a bum on that third day off. You have a weekday to run errands if you have to, but also to be politically engaged and be active in understanding geopolitics, federal politics, world news, U.S. news, the kind of stuff I'm into and doing here, but also local. Like it goes back to getting local. We have to get out and like meet our neighbors and stuff. That's what humans are meant to do.
For care economy, for other uses of our time, rather than inventing new forms of drudgery. And I think for us in academia, a lot of that has already arrived, frankly, because the way we live our lives is very enriching. And it isn't drudgery, and I call it leisure. My wife doesn't like it when I characterize it that way. But I think that the nature of work will change tremendously, should. But if we continue as we are, it will not happen with the remotest equity. Because what's happened now is that good jobs, are being eliminated massively. And a significant part of the population is therefore left with miserable jobs and with the market incomes that go along with that, whereas those who own these transformative technologies are reaching levels of wealth that were unimaginable just recently. So we need
That's another good point. Guys are hitting wealth today that was unimaginable even 10 years ago.
Designed idea. Again, other countries, this is second nature. Every country has guaranteed leave time. Every other high-income country works less than the United States.
We need to set things up. So we need to nationalize healthcare. We need to nationalize Social Security and run that as it's a federal pension plan, and it should be run so it's this huge chunk of money that people are paying into. It should be managed and invested so that it's getting interest instead of like all these interests that like when the U.S. government borrows money. It should actually be borrowing from this Social Security fund, and then the Social Security is making interest. It's investing in other things, real estate. It doesn't have to just be like the government that lends to, and it creates all this capital that's accruing more capital, the way capital's supposed to. The reason Social Security is heading towards insolvency is the same reason the system went down in 2008. It's run by bad people now. It can't be run by good people. We need to nationalize it. We need people running it for the good of the nation, not so they can make themselves wealthy on quarterly bonuses. And then I forget what he was talking about
by
here.
Hundreds of hours, actually.
He was talking about, I don't want to go back too far.
By hundreds of hours, actually, in the case of Europe. And other countries rank higher on countless indicators of well-being, including asking people about their well-being. America ranks...
I forget what, there was something else that I was saying that we wanted to nationalize. Hopefully I can think of it later. But there's certain things that, like, you want certain things to rerun on markets. You want small markets where they work, big corporations where they work best, global geopolitics. But we have to regulate. You always have to regulate. And I totally forget. But so there's certain things we want to nationalize. It's not collectivism. It's not socialism. It's nationalism.
Quite down the list compared to the measured well-being in basically the Northern European countries. And then finally is the question of entrepreneurship and science and industrial policy. There's a lot to say about this, and entrepreneurs certainly make a difference and play a difference. But we, I think, over-glamorize their role tremendously as opposed to the highly institutionalized, unbelievably productive era of science and technology that we're in right now. There's never been a golden age, as we have right now, of scientific advance. And you pick up any single weekly issue of Science or Nature, and it's mind-boggling how productive the global scientific community is. But it is a community, it's not individual entrepreneurs, it's systems. And we need to invest heavily in those systems in order to be able to find...
This is why I really agree with this guy on a lot of stuff. He's making an excellent point here. It's, we're a collective. We're not individuals. We have individuality. We can pick our place in the nation, but it's a system. And systems.
The solutions. The vaccines that we have did not come through one person's breakthrough. Indeed, we have dozens of people claiming it was their breakthrough, which proves that it was actually widespread systems, lots of clever people, lots of university research, especially at Penn, but also at other places.
Our universities used to be like absolutely fantastic. Now they're not really that good. This guy went to Harvard. Harvard used to be a good school. It's no longer a good school. But what made the United States is before our constitutional founding, our revolution, there was Virginia and Massachusetts. Massachusetts, they founded institutions, Yale, Harvard, like good colleges, good universities, and they wanted everyone to read the Bible, both boys and girls, so everyone was universally literate. What makes the United States is education and war. We've always been successful at both. We want to keep being successful at both. That doesn't mean we have to go and fight war, but we want a strong military and we want strong education. Our universities used to be like the greatest institutions in the world. They really were. I mean, they invented everything that makes an iPhone, everything makes an iPhone work. That was like a UC and a Navy project, I think, invented the internet. Our colleges used to be fantastic. They're falling off. They turned into hedge funds. They're charging too much. This stuff can all be fixed, but we want institutional capacity. It's not like we just want no government. We want good institutions, and the universities are paramount. They're like the greatest institutions in U.S. history, and we want to get back to that.
And this is the kind of role of science that we need for the challenges that we have. I have no crystal ball, except to say that none of these fundamental problems works in a disaggregated way. None of them stops at the national border. Ideas of...
this is where I disagree with him. He's sort of semi-social. He definitely believes in like a global order. We past our borders is very different than our borders. Now, we can have diplomacy and we can have trade and we can have all sorts of positive things. And a big thing is winning war isn't necessarily as good as taking the 40-60, putting the 40 part of a 40-60 split on like a win-win deal. And that, like, taking the 40, even if you lose the negotiation a little bit, it's better than winning war often. You create these win-win situations, and the United States is in a position where it doesn't have to take the 40% split. The things we want are the same things other people want. If we open up our ports to Cuba, that's good for us, and it's good for Cuba. It's like helps Cuba more than it helps us. It helps us, too. The United States doesn't have to take the 40-60 split on any deals. But just to illustrate a point, even if you do take, it's often better than war. So it's not like we just want war, but we still want a strong military. We're still not bluffing. It's, we can go flatten someone if they really get froggy. But it's, we want, when it comes to globalism, there's diplomacy, trade, and war. There's no international law. That's ridiculous. Tell Putin he's a war criminal. There's none of that stuff has any relevance. None of it's true. None of it matters. Past our borders is different than in our borders. That's like a fundamental disagreement I have with him. He believes in like global equality. I do not. I'm a nationalist.
Of disentangling or delinking from China are just mind-bogglingly wrong as well. Perhaps understandable in our national angst or neuroses, but we are in an inevitably interconnected world that needs massive transformations in how we live, in how we interact with nature, in how we share the benefits of vast advances of technology, and all of that requires a collective action rather than the markets alone. Markets will play a role. I'm talking about a relative balance, and those are the reasons why I think we will describe the 21st century economy institutionally in a very different way. My time has expired. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Michelle Gelfand from Stanford. I'm a cross-cultural psychologist. Al Peter Zion here, coming from Colorado, and today we're doing another one of our open-ended series on winners and losers in the Iran war. And today we're talking about energy markets, specifically in North America, where the two big players are the American shale patch and Canadian producers primarily, although not exclusively, in Alberta. All right, first things first, let's get an understanding for where we were the day before the war. U.S. shale output is at record levels and by itself is the single largest producer of crude in the world, but most of that crude is light and sweet. The issue is that in shale formations, there's not a big pool of crude for you to stick a straw into. It's tiny, microscopic little packs, and so you drill into it, inject liquid, which cracks the rock, you inject sand, which then goes into the cracks, you pull the water out, and the sand keeps the cracks propped open, so the facility then generates its own pressure as this stuff drains up. And because of that, the oil never migrated through a rock formation, so it's very pure. It's very light, very sweet, low viscosity. Canada's oil sands are very different. It's basically bitumen or oil sand, where you've got a relatively porous rock and the petroleum has migrated through a lot to kind of almost make it a sludgy gel. So it's very thick and very heavy, and some of the crazy stuff is actually solid at room temperature. So they have to often inject steam in order to make it liquid so they can pump it up. Sometimes they literally electrify it, sometimes they strip mine it. Anyway, it's a lot more energy intensive than what happens with US shale. But in both cases, the cost per barrel is pretty high. It's rare that it's under 30, sometimes it's over 60. So in both shale patches and the Albertan oil sands, if prices are too low for too long, a lot of this work just stops. Anyway, on the surface, with having the Persian Gulf go away, right now we're at 10 to 12 million barrels a day offline. Even if the war ends tomorrow, that'll remain that way for at least 3 months because these fields can't just be flipped back on. Some of them will take at least 2 years.
Supposedly the mines that just got laid in the Strait of Hormuz by Iran during peacetime will take 6 months to clear. My estimate is that we're basically locked into like a year of our fate is whatever it is. So we don't know what's going to look like, but basically there's no decisions that can be made at this point that's going to like actually have any impact more than like 10 months out at this point. If they did actually mine the place, I'm not sure. I haven't really looked into it. It was just like kind of like a thing that they, I casually saw a couple days ago on the news. But if that is true, that we're kind of locked in for like the next year, more or less already. So things are gonna, everyone gets as good as what's gonna happen. But it's, he's the reason I started making this point is his number is a low estimate.
Probably more, and that assumes no additional damage, which, considering the path we're on right now, is a laughable scenario. We're probably looking at the bulk of the 22 million barrels per day that comes out of here never coming back, or at least not within a decade. In that scenario, oil prices have nowhere to go but up, and strongly so. So it would appear that U.S. shale and the Canadian shale patch are big winners here midterm, because if the price of oil doubles or more, and your production costs don't change, and you have access to the world's largest market, and you're nowhere near the shooting, it seems like all positives, right? Wrong, because when oil prices go up, there's another piece in play here. First, the Ukrainians are taking out basically the western half of the Russian oil complex. They've already destroyed the ability of the Russians to export through the Baltic. They're going to be working on the Black very soon. That's at least 3 million barrels a day of Russian crude, maybe as much as 5. That simply isn't going to come back either. So we're looking at Persian Gulf crude and Russian crude disappearing from the market at the same time, which will send prices even higher, which again is great for Canada's shale, right? Wrong. Because, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but the American president, Donald Trump, is pretty populist. And if we start getting $10 gasoline in places that, aren't California, there's going to be a bit of a rebellion. And this is something that Trump doesn't have to stretch the law to deal with. Back in 2015, when shale oil was new, there was a big debate in Congress over solar and wind versus oil exports. What was necessary to push the American energy complex forward? And the compromise that was reached was that we would allow oil exports that used to be illegal, and we would subsidize the development of solar and wind. And to make sure that we had a stopgap, the president was given the authority, without having to go back to Congress, without having to even have a hearing, to end U.S. oil exports if market conditions argued for problems, however he defines that. Which means that the 5 million, roughly, barrels a day of crude that the United States exports right now could go to zero with the stroke of a pen. And if we enter in a situation where the American internal oil market gets really expensive to the point that it becomes a political problem for Trump and an economic problem for the country, you bet your ass he's going to do that. So now we're looking at a scenario where Persian Gulf crude and Russian crude and American crude all go offline at the same time, sending prices sky high. So this sounds like it would be great for the Canadians, right? Wrong, because most of the crude that Alberta produces is shipped south to the United States, and it can really only be refined in refineries that the United States operates. They do have one pipeline that isn't doing very well, by the way, called Trans Mountain, that goes out west to British Columbia. That one pipeline will obviously be filled up to its capacity in this scenario, and anyone can get the crude out that way will be able to sell to the global market at a high price. But with that one exception, most of this is actually probably going to be seen energy prices in the United States and Canada going down, because in a scenario where you can't export, we're in an environment of supersaturation. And as long as you can produce crude in the United States and Canada for $60 a barrel, that's pretty much as high as prices can go when you're in such a huge surplus situation. So we get a situation in North America where prices are kind of capped at 60 to 70. We get a price situation in the rest of the world where 200 is a good day, and that's where we are. That doesn't mean that there aren't winners in the North American energy complex. It's just not in production. It's in processing. You see, the restriction on U.S. exports doesn't apply to crude refined products, just to raw crude itself. So if you operate a refinery and you have export options, you can export your naphtha, your crude, or your gasoline, your diesel, whatever it happens to be, to the wider market at inflated prices. It was just one little glitch. U.S. refiners for the last 30 years have steadily retooled their entire complex to run on heavy, sour, imported crude, for example, from Canada. But with the United States locking itself off, most non-Canadian sources of heavy crude are simply not going to be available anymore. And they're going to be forced to deal with the light sweet that comes out of American fields. Now, this can be done. The modifications are easy. They're actually going to be dumbing down the refineries to run on higher quality crude. But in the process of doing that, they're writing off a lot of capital investment. At the same time, they have to invest in a different kind of fractionating system. It's not that that's particularly expensive. It's not that that takes a long time, but it is definitely going to cut into the rate in which they can benefit from these situations. And in the meantime, they're probably going to be having runs that are going at significantly lower efficiencies than they would prefer. In the long run, it'll be great. In the long run, they'll be making more money, but they have to get to the long run first. So for the first year or two, there's going to be a lot of stress on their hardware before they can change over some of the infrastructure. So again, just as we've discussed with almost every other country, the conventional wisdom that a lot of people saw in the first couple of weeks of the conflict really doesn't apply. As soon as something happens, there's a reaction. And oftentimes it's the second, third, and even fourth order effects that are the ones that really stick. That's definitely how it is with this topic.
Because of higher oil prices, the war is impacting the earnings of some companies. Is a recession on the horizon? We will look at this week's quarterly earnings for clues. This week, well over 100 companies reported across multiple industries. These results give us a
guy
good window
who
into the health of the economy.
he was who Steve Carell played in The Big Short. He basically is this great finance guy that they actually read the materials that they got on Wall Street, and so they knew that before 2008 that everything was garbage. No one else actually knew it was garbage. Most people, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know their place in the system, even when they're like in the system, like the bankers. So this guy, basically, he's just a real sharp finance guy.
The results at United Healthcare, Elevance, and Molina were mostly better than expected, or at least met expectations. The industry is turning, or at least appearing to turn. The negative reactions to ServiceNow and IBM show how precarious building a positive software narrative can be. I would tread very carefully. Hi, this is Steve Eisman, and welcome to another episode of the Weekly Wrap. This is for the week ending Friday, April 24th, but recorded Thursday night, April 23. I'm excited to share that in a few weeks, we'll be announcing an additional feature to the Real Eisman Playbook alongside our existing Monday and Friday episodes. This is something we've been building behind the scenes, and it's going to take things in a really exciting new direction. We'll be revealing more soon. Signing up for the mailing list grants access to a special founders offer when the new project goes live. Visit realeismanplaybook.com to sign up. So let's get started. First, the war in Iran. A conclusion to the war remained, as we all know, elusive. Vice President Vance was set to travel to Pakistan to negotiate, but that was put on hold, as the various factions apparently in Iran keep...
Yeah, J.D. Vance has never succeeded at any of the jobs he's been given. He's never succeeded at anything in his life. He's not the solution.
Issuing contradictory statements. President Trump announced that he would give the Iranians time to put together a proposal. In the meantime, the market mostly keeps rallying, as it keeps assuming the war will soon be over. We shall see. In private credit world, there was some bad news. Blackstone's flagship private credit fund called BCRED, which has $81 billion in assets and is the largest private credit fund in the industry, reported sales from new share issuances on April 1st, which were approximately $230 million of gross inflows, nearly unchanged from March and down from $1 billion a month on average in 2025. That's not terrible. The performance news was not so good. Performance was flat in March, slightly better than the negative 40 basis points in February, as write-downs on select private loans and spread widening on loans totally offset portfolio yield. During the quarter, non-accruals increased to 1.4% of fair value.
These big hedge funds, they don't beat the market. The way they make their money, it's like they're like 80s, like hostile takeover type deals. It's like they come in, they run up debt, they've installed their own CEOs in the company who take big salaries. They like spend as much money as they can. They run all the company's credit, and then they declare bankruptcy. That's how they make their money. They're not good for the market. They're not good for the economy. They're not good for anything. Unfettered capitalism does not work. We need a third way economy.
FYI, its portfolio value is driven by write-downs of Medallia and Affordable Care, which are currently marked at 60.3 cents on the dollar and 69.8 cents on the dollar, respectively. On warnings from companies, the war is impacting the earnings of some companies. Because of higher oil prices, United Airlines cut cut its 2026 earnings outlook to a range of $7 to $11, down from its prior forecast of $12 to $14. And on Thursday, American Airlines cut its 2026 guidance as well. Now, last week, we focused on the large banks that reported earnings, and our focus was on credit quality. The banks reported benign credit data, thereby indicating that at least for now, a recession is not on the horizon. This week, well over 100 companies reported across multiple industries, and that provides an even broader picture of the economy. Now, I'm not going to discuss all the companies, obviously, but my conclusion, again, earnings results were mostly good, and there was certainly no data that indicated that a recession is looming. Given that I've already mentioned private credit, let's start with the earnings of Blackstone, which reported Thursday morning. The stock moved lower on Thursday as investors weighed a beat on one key metric against falling returns within its massive private credit and real estate businesses. Distributable earnings rose 25% to $1.76 billion, or $1.36 a share, edging past the $1.34 a share that analysts had anticipated. So a 2-cent beat, no big deal. The metric represents the cash flow available to be paid as dividends to shareholders. Now, total revenue increased a pretty impressive 10% to $3.62 billion, and Blackstone finished the quarter with an amazing $1.3 trillion in assets under management, which is a 12% year-over-year increase. But, and here's the big but, returns fell across certain businesses, even as Blackstone drew in $69 billion in new assets. Weak first quarter investment performance across credit and real estate funds, with opportunistic real estate at negative 90 basis points, core plus real estate at plus 80 basis points, liquid credit at negative 1.3%, private credit at 60 basis points, and PE secondaries at only 70 basis points. I am sure that for at least Thursday, investors will focus on this list of weak performance metrics, and that's why the stock was down. Now, before we move on to other earnings, I want to flag news on Fair Isaac, aka FICO. FICO is the backbone of the entire consumer lending industry. When a consumer applies for any kind of consumer loan, the lender, whoever that is, pulls a FICO score from Fair Isaac. And that score is the largest determinant of whether the consumer gets the loan. FICO has had monopoly on this process for decades. No longer. The FHFA, which is the regulator of Fannie and Freddie, announced this week that the GSEs will start accepting VantageScore loans from approved lenders immediately as an alternative to FICO, effectively concluding the era in which FICO Classic was the only approved score in GSE mortgage world. The updated loan level pricing adjustment will present a level playing field between FICO and VantageScore. Previously, FICO bulls argued that the pricing grids would favor the classic FICO score, and they are wrong. FICO stock has been under assault, with the stock down over 40% this year. Full disclosure, I have been short FICO for a few months. I flagged this story because in a few weeks, we will post an interview with a sell-side analyst who covers FICO and the credit bureaus, and we're going to examine this story in great depth. Now let's move on to health insurance. It looks like that for now, the industry is turning, or at least appearing to turn. The results at United Healthcare, Elevance, and Molina were mostly better than expected, or at least met expectations, which is a big change for the better. With respect to UNH, we have spoken about UNH for many months now, and the company has been dealing with high medical costs as well as problems in its Optum division, a division that provides medical services to Medicare Advantage customers. The bull case for UNH, the case for a turnaround, has been that UNH's traditional health insurance division is a short-tailed business. And that means that UNH has the ability to reprice fairly quickly. And it looks like that's what happened this quarter. UNH reported earnings per share of $7.23 versus $6.57 expected. So a nice beat. But I would just point out that earnings per
I think we got the most important thing he's going to give us on this one. Basically, he doesn't see a recession looming, which is good, but that doesn't mean a recession is not coming eventually. You always have a recession coming eventually, frankly.
Who's conservative? Are you conservative? I'm Mr. Beat, and in
Yes, I am.
some ways, I'm conservative. In other ways, not so much. Dictionary?
That's actually the way I am. That's probably the way everyone is, honestly. We need to be prudent on some things, and but there's things that need to change. In our case, they need to be reactive. They need to be changed back. We need a new constitutional convention. We need to go really old school. We need to go patriot old school.
When it comes to politics, conservatism is a set of beliefs that promotes preserving traditional values. And when I say traditional, I mean stuff handed down from generation to generation to generation to generation. You get the idea, right? Being a conservative means you also often want to protect traditional customs, culture, and institutions. Generally speaking, conservatives are cool with the status quo, with keeping things more or less the same. Conservatives...
There's no one more cool with the status quo in the United States today than liberal elites. They talk left, but only as long as they can live right. They only talk left about the things that don't affect them. They're the ones that want nothing to change. They like little social cues, little, again, things that don't affect them. They don't want any actual change. Liberal elites are the ones that are most dug in to keep things the same.
often get classified as, quote, right-wing. However, as I explained in this video, which I released 6 years ago, holy poop. As I explained in that video, that can be misleading because the whole right-wing, left-wing spectrum is problematic, to say the least. In the United States of America,
left-right spectrum, it's useful It's just that some people, like, people aren't necessarily going to be left about everything or right about everything. Often they kind of are, but it's simplistic. It's not like you kind of want to transcend it eventually, but it's not. The left-right thing I actually think does work. It's just not perfect.
Yes, the USA. We have two major
Not
political
tight
parties,
is what
the
it is.
Democratic
It's
Party
like
and the
everything's
Republican Party.
ambiguous.
When most Americans hear, quote, conservative, they don't think cautious about institutional change. They think low taxes, pro-guns, strong border, anti-abortion, and indeed, for most of my entire life, the Republican Party has generally been considered the more conservative party in the United States. The party that wanted to keep things the same. The party of traditional values. The Democratic Party, on the other hand, was considered the less conservative party.
Barack Obama kept the status quo in place when the whole system went under. He was extremely neoliberal conservative, with the one exception. He had a different paint job.
You know, the party that wanted to change things. By the way, Republicans have only been calling Democrats liberal since the 1980s. Both parties used to call themselves that before then. Anyway, in this video, I'm going to make a take that's hot. I think there's a compelling argument that the Democratic Party is actually the more conservative major political party in recent years. But wait, hold up, will you please hear me out? Oh no, you're...
It is true. I mean, Donald Trump's the one that's upending and like rearranging everything, and the Democrats are trying to kind of get back to a status quo that wasn't good in the first place. That's the problem with them. That's about as far as we can go with this one. I think I like his videos. Am I subscribed here? Yeah, I actually like his videos, but this one I think is as gone as far as it can. He's right. The Democrats, like Kamala Harris, ran the conservative campaign. She ran like the status quo campaign. Donald Trump is the one that's trying to upend everything and change everything and put people out and stuff. He's virtue signaling of getting back to like a great time, make America great again. When was that? When we were founded as a constitutional republic, when we overthrew a tyrant king. That's when we were great. Let's do it again.
Already smashed that dislike button.
Let's see what Ezra
April 15th
has to
was,
say.
as you may know, tax day here in the U.S.
Liberal New York Times columnist, kind of a neoliberal moron, like his like thing. He came out with a book recently that was like abundance is basically like getting rid of the red tape. Now, getting rid of red tape is good, but that doesn't mean you want no regulation. The regulations actually are good. You always need to regulate. We want svelte. I call it blue tape. We want svelte, good bureaucracy. We want state capacity. We want institutional capacity. We want institutions. We want them svelte, lean. We want everything. We want tight tolerances.
If you're a normal American, you make
Everything
money,
top-notch,
your wages,
grade A.
probably not your favorite day of the year. If you make a median income or above, you're handing a lot of that money back to the government. But that is the price we pay for living in a society. Right? Right? Well, not for everyone. You may remember this. In 2021, ProPublica published an investigation built on a bunch of leaked tax documents revealing what the richest Americans really pay, or don't. Warren Buffett had a true tax rate of 0.1%. Jeff Bezos, 0.98%. Michael Bloomberg, 1.3%. Now, we don't get to see their tax documents year on year, but what they're doing, we kind of know what it is and how it works. So what is it and how does it work and what can we do about it? Ray Madoff is a professor at Boston College Law School who specializes in tax law and estate planning and is the author of The Second Estate, How the Tax Code Made an American Aristocracy. She knows how broken the tax system is, partially because she has helped the rich navigate it, and she has some ideas for how to fix it. As always, my email, ezrakleinshow@nytimes.com.
This is probably going to be good. This is like,
Ray
this
Madoff,
woman
welcome
sounds
to the
like
show.
she has an
Thanks so much,
inside
Ezra. Wonderful to be
understanding.
here. So, tax day just passed. A lot of us were...
Taxes aren't bad. We want a good tax system. We don't want to let our elites not pay taxes. The idea that like if they don't pay taxes, they won't innovate. Fine, don't innovate. We can innovate. The U.S. Navy invented everything that makes Apple.
doing our taxes here in the final couple of days, not naming any names. But let's start here. If you're a normal person, what kind of taxes do you pay?
You pay a lot of taxes. Here's the thing. Americans, anyone who has a job or anyone who works for a living, either for themselves or for others, pays significant taxes. They pay income taxes at rates up to 37%. In addition, they pay payroll taxes that are as high as 15.3%. And together, it's a pretty significant liability. So what this means is that high-earning Americans pay lots and lots of taxes, but all earning Americans pay something in taxes.
How does this fit with the statistic people might have heard, which is that our tax code is very, very progressive, almost ridiculously so in this telling, that 40% of people pay no income taxes, and then the top 1% pay 40% of the income taxes. When you hear that, that sounds like a very soak the rich kind of code.
Absolutely. And the problem with that statistic is it's misleading on both ends. So let's start first with the 40% of non-payers. This was, you might have heard this in terms of Mitt Romney talking about the 47%, which is what it was when he was running for office, and he was caught on a hot mic saying 47% of Americans are non-payers, and therefore, they'll never vote for me because they're just takers, not makers.
There are 47% of the people who vote for the president no matter what. All right, there are 47% who are with him, who are dependent on government, who believe that they're victims, who believe the government has a responsibility to care for them, who believe that they're entitled Say healthcare, to food, to housing, to you name it. But it's an entitlement. These are people who pay no income tax. 47% of Americans pay no income tax.
The thing that he didn't account for is the tremendous burden imposed by payroll taxes. And even though 40% of Americans don't pay any income taxes, they still pay significant payroll taxes. Indeed, today I just read a statistic that 80% of Americans pay more in payroll taxes than they pay in income taxes. And these can be quite burdensome because unlike income taxes, they start at $1. So it was wrong and misleading in terms of the non-payers. But where it's particularly misleading is when it comes to this top 1%. We see this all the time whenever there are movements to impose more taxes on the wealthy. The stories start popping up in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Economist. Those are just in the past couple of months. They all say, what are you talking about? The top 1% are already paying 40% of the income taxes. And what this isn't capturing is that they are talking about, that statistic is referring to the top 1% of income earners, those with the most income, high income, lawyers, doctors, finance people. They indeed are paying a significant chunk of the income taxes. However, when it comes to the wealthiest Americans, the Zuckerberg, Bezos, Musk, Ellison, all the people we hear about so often, they are just as likely to be in the 40% of non-payers as they are in the top 1% of payers. And that's because under our current tax system, they are able to avoid taxes altogether by avoiding taxable income.
So walk me through this. You're Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What kind of taxes do you pay? What don't you pay? How do you end up not paying income taxes when you're Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk? Yeah. What are you talking about?
So first of all, let's focus on Jeff Bezos because he's much more of a classic case, right? For Jeff Bezos, he started his own business. He owns, a dominant amount of the stock. And over the course of the years, he has taken a salary that is no higher than $82,000. And it's been over 20 years now, and his salary is always capped at $82,000. And you might say, well, why would it be? He started the company. He's the man. Why isn't he taking a huge salary to reflect all of that he put into the company? And the reason is because salaries are for suckers. When people take a salary, they are subject to high income taxes and payroll taxes. And Jeff Bezos and a lot of our other multi-centy billionaires have no interest in paying those taxes. So instead, they take their benefits through the growing value of their stock, and their stock has grown enormously. And that massive growth of stock happens entirely tax-free with no time frame under our current system in which that stock will ever be subject to tax. And that is because we only impose a tax if the stock is sold, and Bezos never has to sell the stock because he can simply borrow against the stock and use that money to support his lifestyle and to pay any interest that's due on the loan.
So I want to slow this down because there's a lot in that answer. Let me start with salaries are for suckers. One thing that you'll hear is that no, they're not avoiding a salary. What they're doing is making sure their interests are aligned with the companies. You get a salary kind of no matter what happens in the company, but Bezos only makes money if the stock goes up. So this is public spirited. Elon Musk sometimes making like $1 a year. That these are public spirited CEOs who have yoked themselves to actual success, and we should applaud them for it. That paying themselves in stock is just better for everybody, incentives wise, than salary. Why don't you buy that?
Yeah, because it's not true. I mean, what is true is that they are profiting through their stock, arguably it aligns with the interest, but they could be taking a salary too. It would be deductible to the company. There's nothing that really supports that that's the actual reason for doing so. So yes, it's a nice cover story, but I don't think anybody presents it with a straight face.
So I think it can sound like we're just picking rich people at random, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, but there's this 2021 investigation published by ProPublica that came from actual leaked tax documents that gave us a real window into them. We actually know what they paid.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that investigation, what we actually saw and learned from that?
Yeah. So there was a fellow by the name of Charles Littlejohn. That was his actual name.
Named by Dickens.
The Robin Hood character.
Yeah.
And he was a contractor at the IRS, and he saw all of these tax returns, and he leaked them to ProPublica. He's actually in jail now. He was hit with a very significant prison term when they found him, because there were a lot of very rich, powerful people who were quite angry about this.
It is illegal.
It was absolutely illegal.
Right?
It was illegal, but the actual penalty was much smaller than what he actually got. And the reason this information was so important is because, while tax scholars long knew that there were ways for wealthy people to avoid taxes by avoiding taxable income, right? Taking low salaries and not selling their stock. It was always met with, well, yeah, but that's just theoretical. That's not real. But here, when these tax returns were leaked, it was no longer theoretical. It was tax returns of many of our richest Americans paying zero in taxes. And so now it's no longer possible for people to say it's just theoretical, because we know that it's not.
I mean, that investigation found that year that Warren Buffett had what they call the true tax rate of 0.1%, Jeff Bezos 0.98%, Michael Bloomberg 1.3%. I mean, I pay much higher taxes than that.
Yeah. And so I think that, of course, what they're capturing there is their unrealized gains on their stock.
Then the next part of the story you're telling, what is the difference between selling stock to fund your lifestyle? Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, they presumably have private planes and multiple homes and fancy vacations. And what is the difference between funding that by selling stock and funding it by what you just described, which is borrowing against stock?
If they were to sell the stock, then they would have to do two things. One is they would have to pay capital gains taxes, which would be when you take into account all the taxes associated with it, over 23%. So
It's still lower than on a high income.
Absolutely. Selling the stock is definitely a better play than having to take a salary. So
Because again, salaries are for suckers.
because salaries are for suckers, and it turns out selling stock is for suckers too, but just slightly less of a sucker. So you get to pay lower tax rates than you would on your, if you were to take a salary. Your payroll taxes are, you don't have payroll taxes, you just have this net investment tax, which is less, and you have a 20% capital gains rate. So that's better than salaries, but not as good as borrowing against the stock. So you go to a private lender, probably. You could go to a bank, and their biggest risk is that they're going to lend it to somebody who is going to default on the loan. But if you're lending it to Jeff Bezos and he's giving you Amazon stock and other assets to hold as collateral against the loan, the risk of that loan going unpaid is nil. So they are basically making essentially a risk-free loan for which they offer very favorable rates, and still they profit from it because the business is to lend money. But the thing is, when we turn to Bezos' side, the tremendous advantage is that that loan is entirely tax-free. So when he gets that money and buys his yacht, he has not had a taxable event. He continues to own his Amazon stock. He continues to be able to live the lavish lifestyle. And all he has to do is, pay a little bit in interest every year.
I want to stop you again on this. They don't need to pay back the loans, because this really doesn't feel intuitive.
Yeah.
Like, how is it possible to fund a lavish lifestyle on these loans and no one ever has to pay them back, right? At some point, in theory, the loan comes due.
Well, no. Only you're assuming that Bezos lives in the world of Americans who have like 20-year loans on their homes, and the bank is lending the money, counting on getting the money back. These are people lending money in the business of lending money, and they're happy to keep lending money, because if you're in the business of lending money and you get the money back, then you have to find somebody else to lend it to. So why not just keep lending it to Bezos?
So you're just taking out, in this way of funding a lifestyle, one loan after another, sometimes paying one loan back with another. And you're just doing this again and again?
So I think what's hard to internalize is how much wealth it really is when somebody has $100 billion, $200 billion, almost $800 billion. But when it comes to somebody like Bezos and our other centibillionaires, their lifestyle is not, they are not bumping up against the value of their entire assets, right? A few billion really supports quite a lovely lifestyle, and they don't have to get anywhere near where there's some risk that they can't provide sufficient collateral. It would be as if you, in order to support your lifestyle, needed to have $100 relative to the amount of wealth that you have. Do you think it would be hard for you to maintain a loan on that $100 based on the amount of assets that you have and borrow enough to pay the ongoing interest?
So something I don't think it would be hard, but something I think you're getting at here is that consumption doesn't scale. So even when we're talking about how do they fund their lavish lifestyles, look, I don't know what Elon Musk's carrying cost is year on year. I don't know how many homes he's got or whatever, but say it's between $25 million and $100 million.
Yeah.
It's penny change. It's a fraction of the interest.
Yes. That's exactly it. The other thing is that if they sell the stock, they run the risk of giving up control over their companies, and they also run the risk of not being able to enjoy the future growth of their stock. These are companies all heading into the stratosphere, and they don't want to give up any ownership. They want to keep going with this ride, and their stocks have proven to be a very good choice because the growth in value has far outpaced anything they have to pay in interest. So they get to retain control of their companies, they get to ride up the value of these tremendously profitable companies, and they get to do it all entirely tax-free, while all the rest of us are left, holding the bag.
All right, so the story you're telling here is a situation where if you have enough money and that money is not seen by the US government as income, you can borrow against that wealth, and that creates a tax-free form of money that you can use, and you just keep rolling it over and rolling it over and rolling it over. I have a couple of questions about this, but before we get into those, I want to compare this maybe to somebody in the 99th percentile. Let's say you're a Beverly Hills surgeon making $2 million a year.
Yeah.
And then let's say you're a tech founder who has $180 million in company stock and only takes $1 a year in compensation.
Yeah.
Both of those people are rich.
Yep.
What is the difference in the way they're taxed?
So the difference is that, and that's a perfect example, the Beverly Hills surgeon is going to pay a lot of taxes, probably in excess of 50% on all of their earnings. So when they have however much they've accumulated over their lives, they've already paid significant taxes on that acquisition of revenue. However, our tech person, who has a mere $180 million, right, not a billionaire, a piker, still has achieved this $180 million entirely tax-free. There is no tax unless he or she sells the stock. And because they don't have to sell the stock, because they don't want to sell the stock, they often don't sell the stock. And here in the United States, they never have to pay taxes on that gain.
And so then what happens when they pass that stock down? None of us live forever, even though some of us are definitely trying, particularly at the levels of wealth we're talking about here. But assuming they don't figure that out, the wealthy pass away. When the very rich today pass away, and this stock or these other forms of assets we might be thinking about get passed down, what happens from the perspective of the tax system?
Theoretically, what's supposed to happen is that the estate tax is supposed to kick in. And its purpose was to address these transfers by gift and...
She might talk about this right now, but the estate tax got voted down because, billionaires, like some billionaires, it was people like Bill Gates who were actually for it, but and then like some billionaires went against it. There's actually a whole story there, but the important thing is only 2% of the United States is subject to estate taxes. That's a tax we want. 98% of us wouldn't ever pay that or have anything to worry about, and it's a tax on inheritance, which is like, we should have high estate taxes. We don't have estate taxes because we're sold this thing like taxes are bad. Taxes aren't good or bad. They're nuanced. We have to take a more like perspective, or broader perspective. We need nationalist tax policy. What's good for the nation? We are the nation.
At death by imposing a tax at a pretty significant rate in excess of an exemption amount. Today, that rate is 40%. In excess of $15 million. So theoretically, both of our taxpayers are going to be subject to some pretty significant tax liability if they have to pay a 40% tax on the transfer of property that's over $15 million. That's how we imagine the system working. The problem is that the estate tax has become so riddled.
The estate tax should be like 90% above $10 million. I mean, imagine inheriting $10 million. That's still good. If you inherit $100 million, in this case, you would inherit $20 million. Or about $20 million. So, it's like we should have we should have, the exempt amount should be like maybe even less, like 5-10 million, and then like a 90% tax rate. You're still inheriting a lot of money, and if we have a good, robust system with a good economy, people can get educated. We don't really need inheritance, and it's still, you're still inheriting like $20 million. It's not bad. We want
that it
a
is
strong
really more
estate
of
tax.
a tax in name only than it is an actual burden.
Only
And I will give you
2% of the
what I think of as
population.
the ultimate evidence of this, which is that the killing the death tax was the number one issue for the Republicans.
Which is what they call
the estate tax. Getting rid of the estate tax or killing the death tax was a big issue for the Republicans for at least the past 30 years, right? However, in 2025, when they had the chance to do it, right? So we had President Trump, we had an entirely Republican tax bill, and he could include anything he wanted. All of a sudden, estate tax repeal wasn't there. And why is that? I think it's because the estate tax has become so riddled with loopholes that it serves the wealthy more to keep the estate tax on the books, giving the appearance that the wealthy are paying taxes, than to actually repeal the estate tax, and which would shine a light on all of the ways the income tax system benefits inherited wealth.
Your specialty is estates.
Yes.
Tell me about some of the loopholes. If I came to you,
Yeah.
and if I had chosen a more lucrative profession and done well in it, and I come and say, hey, I got $50 million.
Yeah.
And I want to pass that on to my kids, and I don't want the government getting a dime of it. They didn't earn it, and they don't deserve it.
Yeah.
So what would you in maybe a more cynical and mercenary version of you?
Yes.
Like the richer, more mercenary version of me here.
Getting together.
What would you tell me to do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it would matter here whether you were the surgeon or the tech entrepreneur with the stock, right? The surgeon has a much harder time because the surgeon has cash. They were paid in cash. They have cash. And it's a lot of...
They bought stocks or holding index funds, whatever it might be.
Yes, but most of their wealth was achieved in cash rather than in untaxed appreciation. And so here is where people who own stuff, typically stock, really are able to take advantage of the system in a way that others can't quite as well. If you have a business that's worth, let's say, $100 million, and you pass it at death at $100 million, it's valued at $100 million. However, if you cut it up into 3 minority pieces, 35%, 35%, and 30%, each of those pieces is entitled to a discount of up to like 30, 40%. Now, all of a sudden, your $100 million has been shrunk to $50 million, $60 million, and then it appears on the other side at your kids blowing back up to $100 million. That's one way we call those minority discounts. But even better are devices where somebody creates a dynasty trust. These are really the...
Sounds good. I want a dynasty trust.
And dynasty trusts are fascinating because the purpose of the estate tax was to avoid dynastic wealth, right? And it's a sign of how flagrant the estate planning can be that they actually just call these dynasty trusts. Yeah, we know they're supposed to not have dynasties, but we got dynasties for you. And what they do is they create a vehicle for your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, forever in perpetuity to benefit from this trust and the growing value of this trust. And they get funded through a lot of complex arrangements, oftentimes through sales. You will sell your stock early on to this company in exchange for a low-interest note. And for estate tax purposes, you've gotten it out of your estate. But for income tax purposes, you're treated just as if you're dealing with yourself. So you pay no taxes on that transfer. And these dynasty trusts, through devices like that, are being stuffed with billions and billions and billions of dollars. And this is happening all around the country. Around the country, estate planners are helping their clients fund these dynasty trusts. There's also charitable vehicles that are used where basically you give a charity an interest up front and then at the end it goes to a private person, but you price it such that all of the gain is somehow written out of the picture until it magically appears at the end of the story. It's the same thing with grats, rolling grats. A lot of these are stories of
rolling grat.
rolling grats. Like
Of course,
rock
yeah,
beer,
rolling
like rolling rock beer, rolling grats. So a grat is something that is a grantor retained annuity trust. And you don't want to know what it is, but it is a device by which people are able to transfer enormous amounts of wealth tax-free. And these are just some of the many devices that are used and that estate planners have and have had for too long now.
Why do they have all these devices? Were the devices created to be used this way? Were they created for another purpose and people just figured it out?
Yeah.
Like, is this tax code designed to do this? Or has it been chopped up through kind of brilliant tax machinations?
So let me step back for a second. In order for a tax system to work, there has to be a dance between taxpayers and Congress or the IRS, whoever is the regulating authority. Basically, Congress sets out some rules, the IRS sets out some regulations, taxpayers and their estate planners or other advisors find ways around the rules. Congress or the IRS is supposed to come back in here and close the loopholes, respond to that. Taxpayers go out, they try to find other loopholes. And together, there's this dance that it does a pretty good job of making sure that the tax system is doing a pretty good job of collecting the revenue we need in the country to run the country. For much of the 20th century, this worked pretty well with the estate tax. The estate tax was seen as a very innocuous tax, well accepted in the country. It serves as a backstop to the income tax system, which had all these ways for wealth to grow tax-free, right? And the estate tax was there as like a sweep-up tax to make sure that it was going to be subject to tax. The problem was, in 1990, they stopped. And that was the last time we have had any reform done to the estate tax. But of course, the estate planners haven't stopped. They have.
Did it stop? Because my understanding is we've had cuts to it since then. I mean,
Exactly.
George W. Bush, you could call it reform or not reform, but it has been chopped up and sliced up and made weaker.
All that, right. So
quite a bit since then.
Well, what has happened is that there have been two changes. The exemption amount has increased and the rates have decreased.
And so there was a big discourse around this. I remember this a bit. It's like, oh, these people are passing down family farms, and their family farms are getting taxed away.
Yes.
And so they cut it up then. So how does it change?
Right. So that double tax that hurts family farms and
The details here are getting boring. Like we get the gist of this. We need much better tax policy. The only way we're going to get it is a full overhaul of our system that Democrats aren't answering either. We're coming in at like 52 minutes, so that's a good spot to stop for now. Till next time. Till later, I was going to say. Till next time.